Okay. I think the recording is okay. Hello, this is part of Versopolis Poetry Expo, and we are here with two wonderful literary translators and poets, Keith Payn and Marta Eloy Cichocka. And the reason why I invited you to this conversation is the translation of Yolanda Castaño's poetry. Yolanda Castaño was the guest of last year's Miłosz Poetry Festival, an international poetry event, which is held here in Kraków. And both Marta and Keith translated Yolanda Castaño's poems for this Versopolis poetry booklet. And I was thinking that it's very interesting to have a conversation about your process of translating the same poems, but to two different target languages, the perspectives of you as poets and translators, both on translation itself and also of translation of this particular body of work. But first of all, I would like to ask both of you, how did you come across Yolanda Castaño's poetry? Because the Versopolis poetry booklet, this booklet, it was not the first time that you encountered it. So can you talk a little bit about your first experience of this poetry and maybe what drew you to it, to translate it? Kif, would you like to begin?
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. So I spend part of the year in Galicia, as where we're talking from today, in Vigo. So I'm around the Galician poetry scene. So I knew Yolanda from then. The first encounter with translating her work was a commission I received for this book, which was 6 Galician poets. It's part of a Europe-wide series published by ARC, 6 Galician poets, 6 Catalan poets, probably 6 Polish poets, 6 Croatian poets. And Yolanda's work was in that as the first time I found it. But really, Maria, and this goes for almost every poet I translate, what first attracted me to Yolanda's work was hearing her read live. I work from the ear first and foremost, and we'll chat about this more. So on hearing Yolanda perform her work, and she does perform, she does have a persona that reads the poems. That's what first drew me in and alerted me to the possibilities that here's someone I could translate.
Mm-hmm. Marta, what about you?
So I had maybe the same, well, not the same, but my experience with Yolanda was also a personal one, in the sense that I actually met her in person in a poetry festival in Soria. As I know Soria from being a recipient of this how do you call it? It's not scholarship. It's like
it was the Antonio Machado Award, wasn't it?
It was the
Yeah.
exactly. So it was the Antonio Machado Award, and then they have this magnificent only poetry festival. I think it's not only poetry festival. It's like the only poetic book fair I've ever been to. Only poetic book fair. So she was, and it was actually just 1 year or the second year after the pandemic. So Spanish organizers, actually, they didn't want to risk to invite any foreign countries, like guest countries at the moment, because last year, for example, was Romania. But at that time, actually, the invited country was Basque country. And Yolanda was there just making a very short reading. And actually, she was on her way to United States. She was like a little bit stressed because she was in Soria. Soria is like 2 hours from Madrid. It's not very easy to get there. I call it Planet Soria, and she was there, actually thinking already about her trip to California. And so this maybe also this made her reading like more intense. And also she was actually supposed to read after us. And I was the one who decided to give her space. I actually stopped our reading and saying, look, we have a poet, a colleague here waiting. so make a space for Yolanda Castaño. And she remembered me. So we became friends there, but it was, just a couple of years ago. And I was amazed. I usually record with my phone poetry readings that impress me. So I have her recorded, but I've never imagined I would be able to translate her, because my knowledge of Galician is actually not like yours, Kate. It's very passive one. I can read in Galician, I can read in Portuguese, but I speak Castilian, I speak Spanish. And then 2 years ago, 2 years ago. So 2 years later, I was invited to her workshop, poetic translation workshop on Isla de San Simón, which was also one of the most incredible translation workshop, because it was not only very intense one, but also it was a very creative one, in a sense that we were coming from different countries. So Basque country and Romania and Estonia. And Switzerland, but the part when they speak Romance, and Poland and Galicia also, and we were actually trying to translate ourselves. So having the originals, like Estonian original, you can also try, but we were also translating, having the Spanish version, which made us speak a lot, which makes us actually speak a lot every day about translating ourselves, about problems, about strategies, about how all of our languages work. So it was a very intense workshop, several hours a day, talking and trying to understand ourselves, and also how the creative process goes, because we were all poets and translators. So that is where I met her, where I spent a week with her, in her kingdom, not in her house, but in her kingdom, in La Isla de San Simón, which is a magical place. So when Maria invited me to try to translate her, I already knew her, and I repeat what you said, guys. It's very important to hear this poetry, because her poetry has this amazing millennial tradition. It's not like, not all of the European languages or poetry schools can actually say my tradition is like millennial. I have 1,000 years of using this language to express lyric. Excuse my rusted English. My English is probably the worst language.
Perfect. It's perfect.
I speak with signs.
I think it's very interesting what you mentioned, Marta, this meeting between translators who are also poets, and this ability to interact and communicate, because it seems to me that when we think about translation, the perception of translators' work is a perception of a very solitary experience, an isolated process that takes place between the translator and the text. I don't know, but I think this tends to be the perception of this project, this process. And here we have something quite different, a communal experience, which also I think is something that Keith mentioned, because I just. And it's also part of an important part of Versopolis project, which is to bring the creators, translators, poets together during literary festivals. So maybe you can just talk about a little bit about this experience of participating in events like this, and how it sort of influences your works, both as poets and as translators, because this is a very important and interesting subject for me, that both of you are translators and poets as well. So this is something, so it's another thing that I wanted to ask you, and maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that as well, is the way in which your poetry, the fact that you are, each of you is a poet, influences your work as translators. Keith, would you like to be the first to answer that?
Yeah, I would. And just as you were speaking, of course, I was realizing some of the great translation relationships across poetry have been in person. Of course, Milwash and Robert Haas when they lived in California together. Haas didn't speak Polish, but they got to know, just as Marta and Gallego, they got to know each other, got to know the essence of their work through years and years of just sitting around discussing poetry and talking poetry. Robert Bly and Thomas Tranströmer is another great example, the Swedish and the American, Brodsky and his translators. I know, for example, Olga Tokarczuk has a very close relationship with Antonia Lloyd-Jones, her English translator. And like Marta, I love translating living authors, and I go to visit the place, especially when they're poets of place. I go to visit the place that their poems come from and walk the area, preferably with them, talk with them, meet them. The first thing I do is go with my dictaphone and record them to read the poems. So in fact, the first time I actually physically met Yolanda, we sat down and I said, okay, read your poems, I'm going to record you. And then I'll go home and just listen, put those on the headphones and listen and listen and listen and listen. And try not to decipher what the words are saying, but try to gather a tone and a sense of the poetic voice just from how they speak, the pauses, the emphasis. Marta used the word intensity a couple of times earlier on. And in fact, I've been doing experiments over the last couple of years in translation workshops where I'll bring a language in that nobody in the room speaks, and we'll actually translate a poem from a language that no one speaks. And it's uncanny. Now it'll take the whole morning, and we'll play the poem over and over and over and over again. And I'll ask some leading questions, but it's actually uncanny how much is being communicated by the spoken voice, by the gesture, by the pause, by the tone of voice. And see, we forget that in our own languages because the rational brain takes over. And we forgot that so much of poetry is music. I think sometimes we can get a little bit too cerebral in translation and in encountering poetry. It's not always, but a lot of the time it's music and it's dance. And when you encounter someone like Yolanda performing, you've both seen her perform, you hear that. You hear the intensity, the rage, the frustration, the anger, the delight, the irreverence, all coming through her voice. So for me, I consider it a privilege, and I can gain so much by being in the room with the poet when I'm working with them.
Marta, what about you?
There is so much to say, but I agree with Keith, and I also, Keith, we must meet because we don't know each other, but actually I feel that we think the same.
Yeah.
So for me, okay, to start with the second part of Maria's question, for me, writing, we all write because we are readers. So for me, writing starts with reading, and you see our rooms, and you only see like a small part of our rooms, and our rooms are filled up with books. So I remember I started reading at the age of 3. So I was like reading, like devouring all of the books around me, and I found poetry, and I was amazed also because it was a little bit shorter, so it seemed more simple, long. Like, so I tried to imitate it, and of course I started writing my poems when I was, I don't know, 10 or 12, just by imitating. And then I came across as a student, as a Spanish student, I came across a poet which I didn't know him, and I didn't know he was so serious because I was just, in ancient internet times we had like discussion groups, so I was in this participating, but I didn't send anything. I was just reading what they were sending, and this was a group of Argentinian readers, so they were sending poems, and then I came across Roberto Juarro's poetry. He's a very well-known but very independent Argentinian poet, and when I was reading him in Spanish, basically I started translating him because I wanted my mother to read his poetry, and she speaks French, but she doesn't speak Spanish. So for me, translating is about sharing. It's always about sharing. And then, of course, as you see, the quantity of books, reading is like individual activity, and we usually read because we are alone and we want to be in silence and so on. But literature, as literature, as phenomenon, didn't start like this, because this was like a late invention. It started, like as Keith said, it was actually all the primitive or first original literary forms actually started as a manner of bringing people together with music, with dances, and it was basically about spending time together. They were actually gathering to listen to each other. And so last year I was invited to a very strange and powerful, but also very strange literary festival in Kenya.
Yes.
And this was amazing because we saw their poets recite, and this was exactly what you say. We didn't understand anything here, but we could understand everything here. So it was amazing to see again how you can have thousands of years of producing music with your voice and explaining things. This year I was invited to Cairo Book Fair, which also was amazing because I speak like 3 words of Arabic, but I was translated into Arabic this time. Yolanda was also there, so I could see how the public reacts to her reciting, and they really they could feel her, even if they didn't understand her when she was reading in Gallego, reciting in Gallego. But also then there was like staff members, and one of the members actually liked my poem, and he said, if you want, I can record it for you in Arabic. I said, yes, please. And and he started to recite my poem in this very non-European way, because he was actually showing my poem with his hands, and I was amazed, because that's how it can be. It's not only supposed to be like elitist, solitary activity, poetry and translation. And talking about workshops, it's very important for me also as a university professor. For me it's essential to make my student understand what we know here, that literature is made by people, and people know each other, and they actually go out together and they drink wine, Spanish wine, because I'm a Spanish literature professor. So they actually can exchange, like in a free way. And we also know this because when you can go and grab Irish beer, and you can go and grab Polish beer, and you can exchange it. That's how normal poets and writers act. But our students don't know this. They don't realize this because they imagine literature is only books. So actually what I did in 14, 15, I actually invited a bunch of poets to Kraków and to Warsaw. And that's how we started making something called, that's how Republika Poetica started also. But first, before Republika Poetica, I created something called Manufactura de Poesia. And the idea was very simple. You bring a poet, you bring participants of a translation workshops, and you actually make them ask the poet, what do you want to say here? So this is the taboo question. You can, but in the same time, this is actually the most interesting question, because not only because you can learn something about the creative process of the person who is there, who can explain this to you. I wanted to say this is an allusion to this, that's how it works, and here it's only about music for me, okay? Because also for the writer, for the poet, it's very interesting to be confronted with the creative, active participant, active reader, because the translator is the most active reader, because he must understand, make this interpretation process, and then tries to create another text in his language. So very often poets, they don't realize what they write. They know so much. This is not my idea. This is Paul Valéry's idea. I mean, this is what he says somewhere. He says, "Don't you ever ask a poet what he wants to write, because he doesn't know. He knows what is his intention, but he cannot be sure of his own result, because his result goes to someone else who can read something." This is also what we know, that interpretation is a very creative thing. And we all read dead people, so they are not there to explain this to us. So actually, it's important to see the literature and translation as a very creative, active process, to be able to say, I see this like this, I feel this like this, and I can sign my version, but you are free to sign yours. This is basically my credo. I put several how do you say, several cuts in
one. Very good.
Yeah, this is so important what you said, Marta, about the fact that translators, and I saw Keith nodding enthusiastically, so I think we can agree that translators are in fact the most attentive readers of what they translate, and this is why I often say that some of the most interesting and deep conversations on the books of authors that we invite to our festivals are the ones hosted, chaired by by their translators, because they are the ones who spend so much time just dissecting the work. Keith, you were I saw you sort of nodding along what Marta said.
Yeah.
So did you want to add something, or maybe just elaborate on it?
Just so much that I agree with Marta. And John Berger has a lovely image where he talks about storytelling, and he said, we've been telling stories since we've been sitting around the fire, down in the valleys near Kenya and near Ethiopia, and essentially, while that story's being told, we're all safe from the dark void that's behind us. And I think I go with the idea that poetry, novels, painting, dance, any art form is essentially just storytelling. We're just telling a story. We're just standing up and saying, I'm here. This is what I've got to tell you. And so, and actually, just as a brief, this year in Galicia, the Galician Day of Literature, which is celebrated every year in May, to coincide with Rosalía de Castro's publication. This year, they're celebrating popular culture and music. Usually, the Galician Day of Literature since 1963 has been dedicated to an author, a dead author. But this year, they're celebrating the women who are known as the cantareiras, the popular singers who maintained the popular memory and the language and the song orally throughout generations. And I've actually have a piece going up on Versopolis next week, a short essay we've written with my partner about this. And it's revolutionary and it's really radical and so necessary, as you'll know, Marta, with your young students, that they're reminded that no, it's not this. It's previous to all this, and it's people in a room together, in a space together, in a field together, at a festival together, and that hit you get from being in the room just cannot be replaced.
Absolutely. And the other radical idea, I mean, I feel it more and more, is that literature, poetry doesn't belong to the authors. It doesn't belong to the authors. It belongs to the readers. It's always. I mean, that's how it goes. Of course, you can see all those incredible names. You can see Sappho here and Joyce here, and you know. But this is I don't know. This is like wine. Wine only counts if you drink it, and it must go through your system to make you happy, to make you feel something, to make you reactive. And also this explains, because this goes, I feel a strong danger of this. It's a little bit like ecology, and and rivers. Rivers should be free, essentially. There is some internal logic, some earth logic in rivers, and also making them more dangerous sometimes. If you try to control them too much, it's actually more dangerous. And literature also is like this. So if you are talking about literary market and author rights and so on, actually you stop this free creation. And I always ask my students, do you know where the author rights actually started? Because it started somewhere, and they'd never know. And I say, Walt Disney. You must think about Walt Disney, because he was actually the first guy obsessed with author rights so much that he stopped everybody. He stopped the possibility of using his characters, and he made everybody pay if actually they used one. But before him, and all the 19th century is filled up with authors translating, transforming, like Mickiewicz translating Pushkin from Russian and writing his own sonnets inspired by Pushkin. But that's how it goes. Actually, that's how it really goes.
Yeah, Keith, go on.
Marta, can I ask you, because it's something that I find more and more acutely, the more that I translate, the more I learn about my own English language and Irish, Anglo-Irish literature through difference. Translating and reading Spanish, Galician, what has it taught you about, let's say, modern Polish poetry, the poetry that you were raised on, and that's part of your reading DNA?
Yeah, it's a big question, because I found the same difference also in Latin American poetry. I feel that Galician poetry, and especially Latin American poetry, is much more sensual, much more free in a way. It expresses emotions, and it's not because Polish contemporary poetry, especially in these postmodern versions, is very ironic. It is supposed to be ironic. You shouldn't ever sign something you really believe. You must also put it like,
in inverted commas.
And I've been translating so many young Latin American poets, and I had this trouble because if I actually, when I translate, I never try to correct my authors. I try to trust them and just bring in Polish what they bring, because exactly in the same way I cook. If I cook gazpacho, I don't want this to be a Polish tomato soup. I want it to be gazpacho. No, but seriously. So when I translate someone who writes in this very, post-Nerudian way, he will sound very strange in Polish, because it will be like very big ideas and like
Exactly.
But so the same thing happens with Yolanda. If she plays with sounds and images, and her poetry is very sensual and very intense, I must take a risk of bringing her like this, and it will be maybe uncomfortable for a Polish contemporary poetry reader, because he will feel, or she will feel, that this is not something we are used to. And also of course we have this we are always between this huge romantic tradition, but which is very old now, and we have this post-Szymborskian ironic smile, which is also a classical thing. But I feel we should be open to bring some new ideas. I would like to translate now Kenyan poetry, because I think Kenyan poetry could be actually much more linked to our traditional Polish, the traditional forms, which were actually forgotten, and now there is like a little hipster thing, like, you know, boho thing, and let's bring ethno music, and let's hear what they were singing. But it's a little bit like ethnic folkloric thing. But for me, it's real. That's how that is one of the ways of poetry of 21st century. Look at the traditional poets, listen to them.
Yeah, and that's really what started the question, because I've noticed it with the last book I did, which is Whales and Whales. It's got a classic 1989 text from Galicia, and would have been very much an influence on Yolanda, by Luisa Castro. And I started noticing at readings in Dublin and in London and Oxford, by that tension you feel in the room, because you're bringing a strange idea of what a poem is, a really strange notion. And so it taught me a couple of things. It taught me, first of all, how fixed we are with our idea of what a poem is. Definitely Polish readers will have a clear idea of what a poem is. Irish readers will be the same. We're so influenced by the so-called well-made poem that Heaney talked about. And you can feel a tension in the room when you bring in something strange and new, and you almost have to teach your readers how to read these poets, and really have to engage them with a sense of, look, you're going to have to try and drop all your pretenses to what a poem is and to what poetry is, and really just open yourself to that experience. And so each poem then, and each poet, become their own individual moment, and that's how you have to accept them. And so it's a very interesting way of dismantling and even questioning and shaking up our notions of what poetry is and what it can be. And as you said, Marta, the sensuality of Spanish language poetry and Latin American poetry. I mean, anyone who's read Lorca, I mean, that's it's just pure sensation and image and color and sound. And in fact, I've had more fun translating someone like Lorca, especially those dance poems, the waltz, the Viennese waltz, and the waltz in the trees. And you go, well, okay, the clue's in the title. It's a waltz, so let's write it in 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and let's dance through it, you know?
Absolutely, of course. But this
And
is essential.
I wonder, and sorry, I wonder also, and it's I haven't really put it to the test yet. I think no matter how much we learn to speak Galician or English or Polish, a second language, I don't think we'll ever experience it as the native speaker experiences the language on their ears, on their bodies. And so maybe we can bring some of that strangeness with us, instead of trying to make Marta, Eloy, into an English that's equivalent to how Maria hears her. Well, no, maybe I'll bring some of that strangeness and
Absolutely.
that my experience of Marta, and bring her over to English, you know.
But this is this is about a little bit about what's also going on in translation theories. I actually like theory. I have big quarrels with my colleagues at the university, because they are translators and they don't trust theory. And I say, look, theory can help you understand how it, I mean, how things go. So this is there is this possibility of foreignization, I think it's called, and domestication. So you can actually try to bring Marta and make her more Irish, or you can leave her and be Polish. But also I feel that we actually owe, and this is a very positive influence if it's in this way. We owe a lot to all of the internet and even social media, because this makes, for example, Yolanda Castaño accessible. If somebody wants to hear her, you can just Google her, and she's there on her website, and she actually can read in Galician for you. So you don't have to go to Galicia to listen to her. But in the same time, you will, as a reader, you will hear her, so you can understand how she sounds. So already you bring her home as she is still Yolanda Castaño speaking Galician. So this also explains why I think now translators are actually trying to keep this exotization possible, because people also travel, so people actually like to recognize also foreign food, you know, and so on. So this on one hand, and on the other hand, I totally agree with you. When you translate, you of course have also these two or maybe three theoretic concepts like formal equivalence or dynamic equivalence. So usually when you want something to work, you like how to say, like playing with words, you should create one. So you should use this dynamic equivalence to make things work. But when you do this too much, actually you will lose this formal equivalence, which is essential, talking about the rhythm of a poem. And I'm so fed up with all of those translations who, taking Lorca as an example, for me it's absolutely impossible to translate Lorca losing his music, losing his melody, losing his valses, and only translating ideas, And here I think it's very useful for us to be poets also, because we can understand, we remember how the creative process goes on. It's never like, let me think what I put in this poem. No, actually there is something free, like you start to write, and if you have like a rhythmic pattern, organic pattern, if you're in your writing, actually words come to your head, and actually they come. It's not that you look for them. Actually, in my case, when I was writing sonnets many years ago, I remember writing sonnets as the most easy. It was the easiest thing to write a sonnet. Contrary to what people think, because people think writing a sonnet is very complicated. No, it's not. It's short, and it's very clear how it should be. So actually, you know also where it stops. Which, for example, in contemporary poetry, the biggest problem is when you finish your poem. Is your poem finished or not? In contemporary poetry, modern poetry is free poetry, so you must feel when it's finished. But sonnet, it's finished. 14 verses, finished. Then you must find rhymes, but rhymes actually, that's how our head goes. When I know how rhymes should be, actually, words come to my head. So then, but they come. So then I was writing, and I wrote this. Okay. So actually, if somebody translates sonnet, the most important thing is to make it work and try to stick to the ideas, but not just translate it as an instruction, or translate it as, I don't know, a culinary recipe. It's not about culinary recipe. It's about music. It's about harmony.
Well, yeah, the sonetto, the Sicilian sonetto, was originally a sung poem.
Absolutely.
Among farmers. I would love to hear Yolanda in Polish. Is that a request we can?
Possible?
Is that a request we can send in to the DJ?
Yeah, absolutely. But we could actually, because we have the same book, so you can choose the poem you like.
Let's
and
read
you can
a poem
read
in
it.
English and in
You can
Polish.
read it in English, and I can read it in Polish.
Metrophobia is always a nice one. There's a good speed to it.
She was reading it in the Cairo book fair, and in Cairo book fair, when she says we are going to read our poems in Monforte de Lemos.
Monforte de Lemos.
It sounded like the center of the world.
It is.
No, but we know it's not. But there it was like the center of European poetry.
Yeah, it's Monforte de Lemos.
Okay. So could you read it also in Galician?
Yeah, I'll read it in Gallego, no problem. Should we have it in Galician first and then in Polish?
Yes, I suggest first maybe Gallego, then I can read in Polish, and then you in English.
Beautiful. Okay, metrofobia. Al fondo del paisaje, A chuvia esbellece as nubes cun borrón. Esta foi de ruta melita no xogaresca. Xa teño gana de partir e o meu coche é un soldado. Non vas aindo chifrar o ceo cargamento sensible. As estradas comarcais parecen cadernos pautados. Gustaríame sucar os montes con poema ao lombo como as viaxantes. O meu coche é unha bala prateada con ritmo en vez de pólvora e eu dígole, vamos! Xuntos atravesamos vales, barrios de funcionarios, as grandes explotacións eólicas, danme ganas de lotar contra os xigantes. O meu coche, mas eu, entendémonos, sen dicirnos nada. Flores brancas de ibuprofeno. O meu coche é un soldado e eu dígale, vamos recitar poemas a Monforte de Lemos. El acompasa o seu motor ao meu registro, repenica, badelea, aínda que teña metrofobia.
Mil gracias. Metrofobia. W głębi krajobrazu deszcz rozmywa chmury jak kleks. Ta mapa podróży walczy w lidze bardów. Już chcę ruszać w drogę, a mój samochód to żołnierz. Nie słyszysz, jak pogwizduje jego wrażliwy ładunek? Wiejskie drogi wyglądają jak zaszyte w linie. Chciałabym przekraczać góry z poematem na plecach jak komiwojażerowie. Mój samochód to srebrna kula z rytmem zamiast prochu, a ja wołam do niego: jazda! Razem przemierzamy doliny, dzielnice klasy średniej, wielkie farmy wiatrowe napełniają mnie ochotą do walki z gigantami. Mój samochód i ja rozumiemy się bez słów. Białe kwiaty ibuprofenu. Mój samochód to żołnierz, a ja wołam do niego: jedziemy czytać wiersze w Monforte de Lemos. A on reguluje rytm silnika zgodnie z moim tempem, stuka, brzęczy, choćby miał metrofobię.
Gosh, she sounds great in Polish. She sounds great. There's a wonderful sense, just from the sound, there's a wonderful sense of intimacy and kind of, an informal conversational intimacy between the poetic voice and you. It's lovely. That's gorgeous. It's great. I adore hearing poems in any language, really, because you hear the music. Metrophobia. It was a lot of fun to translate this poem. Off in the distance, the rain stains the clouds. This map is true for balladeers. I can't wait to go around, and my car is a good soldier. Can you hear its sweet cargo whistle? The old roads open up like a ruled notebook. Oh, I'd love to score the mountains like a sales rep, my case full of poems. My car's a silver bullet burning with rhythm instead of gunpowder, and I shout, vamos! Together, we bear down on valleys, civil servant suburbs, and those huge windmills urge me on to face the giants. We get each other, my car and me. There's no words needed. White lilies of paracetamol, my old soldier, and I say, let's go read poems in Monforte de Lemos. His engine humming along to my tune. It rattles and sings, even though he's got metrophobia. Lovely.
Lovely, but it was full of problems also. It was very fun.
Oh, Jesus, yeah.
But for example, it was a poem I kept as unsolved because when I have a problem, I leave it. And I was actually trying to find this Hoglareska thing.
Yes,
because this is so. Finally, I created something like Bard's lead.
Bardo, yeah, Bardo.
Yeah. But this was actually very, very hard and also very imaginative and also very, Hoglareska for Maria. Juglareska is just a kind of oral literature, medieval oral literature. So when she says this map, yes, this map of journey actually fights in this Juglareska thing. How do you translate this?
Yeah. Well, it's funny that I actually made the same solution or same direction as you did, where you went for a bard. I chose a balladeer, which is essentially the same thing. Balladeers were traveling oral singers and reciters, just as the bard was, and just as the juglaresco. But as you say, Yolanda's poems are full of challenges, serious challenges. They're quite oblique at times. They're the juxtapositions in them, and again, maybe you're I think you're the same, at least in the kind of standard 20th century modernist style of poetry. We're used to a fairly clear narrative. This happens, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens in the sonnet form, in any of those forms, and we can follow the story. But Yolanda's jump here, there, and everywhere.
As she travels.
Yeah, she's bouncing around the place. She's here, she's everywhere. The line is here, and it's really difficult to get a grip on it.
And you know her last book, Materia?
I haven't translated it yet. I've read a few of the poems, and I think you have a few of them in here in this lovely chapbook.
I finished the Polish translation, so if we are lucky, we will publish her this year and maybe bring her again.
Oh, well done.
Because this book is very complex. This one
is the narrative more settled or more consequential? No.
It's actually divided in 3 parts.
Yeah.
Like iceberg. So she has one that is called Un río subterráneo. And then there is, for example, my favorite poem where all of the words start by E.
Okay.
So you must find something. So this is also a perfect example of what we were talking about. To translate such a poem, you must actually create another one.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I that's the premise I work on. Yes, you have that notion of loyalty and fealty and but really you're making a poem in your own language that a native reader should encounter it and not think they're reading a translated poem, that they're reading a poem made in your own language. And now and again, it's nice to be able to keep, like, for example, where I keep the word vamos in that, like, through television and through music and through
it's true.
Para la Bamba, we'll know the word like vamos or fiesta or little exoticisms that remind the reader, we're making this poem in English and you're to be able to read it, but just to remind you, we're in Monforte de Lemos. Just don't forget, you're not in Edinburgh or Manchester or London or Krakow. You're in Monforte. And the first time I came across that really strongly was the great translator Jonathan Dunn. He translates huge amounts of Galician literature, mostly prose now. And one of his novels he had translated by Manuel Rivas, probably the best known Galician prose writer. In the story, the young kid has to race home really quickly to get something his father forgot and get back quickly. They're really under pressure. And obviously the phrase in English would be, he ran like the wind. That would be the standard phrase. In English, I'm sure Polish has a standard as well.
Yes, jak wiatr.
Yeah. But Jonathan left it in the Galician, which is, he greased his shins. And it's a beautiful image. He left the equivalent, but you understood fully what he was doing. You understood greasing your shins meant go like the wind. And it just reminded you for a second, we are in a specific place, and place is important here. So I love when you get to do those things of just drop, to disturb the language a little bit, maybe, to disturb the reading and just remind the reader,
Of
Hey,
course,
we're somewhere else.
of course, but that's how actually a language can grow and can change.
Mm,
And on the other, I mean, we are talking about literary translations here and
yeah,
poetry translations, but our kids, our teenagers are doing this all the time because they bring all these strange anglicisms and then they put it. I have two teenagers at home, so talking,
okay,
with them, it makes me understand how
yeah,
Latin transformed itself in
yeah,
Spanish and Italian because they actually changed it. They totally change all the meanings.
yeah.
And you say something, you say sigma, okay, you say aura, and suddenly has a total different meaning.
Hmm. Yeah,
So,
yeah,
so also, I mean, this is also a conversation about languages, about how
yes,
they change.
yes, yeah. Well, yeah, and that's why it's great to keep in contact with teenagers and 20-year-olds. No, because they remind you. I used to teach in the university,
Yeah.
and now I just keep in touch with my nieces and nephews. But they remind you how old-fashioned and staid you can become and how fresh and inventive they are. And it's great to have conversation and just listen to them really, and just to see how quick and how inventive they are. I mean, Samuel Johnson, who wrote the first English dictionary, when he wrote it, said, look, this is a poor excuse. Language is so alive, we'll never catch it. We'll never pin it down
Yeah,
on a
absolutely,
page,
absolutely.
but we'll try our best. We'll do the best we can to make a reference book, but we'll never catch language. And I love that idea of the vitality and the constant metamorphosis of the language. And like we've said earlier, influences of sound and dance and sensuality and registers and all these things coming in to have that one impact on you really is something quite special.
Yes, and we are grateful to. I mean, I'm very grateful to have such an amazing job, like in a live
Yeah,
in this living energies.
yeah.
Yeah.
Maria, we've run away with you. We've
Yeah,
taken the
no,
conversation away.
it's
We are
no, it's
passionate.
wonderful because actually you talked about the things that I was going to planning on asking you. So this is perfect. I just had yeah, and it's so many. There are so many intriguing sort of threads in this conversation, and I was thinking just to get back to your point about the language being so ever transforming. Do you see your role as translators in transforming and changing and testing the limits of the language of the target language that you work in, that is your native tongue? Do you see your roles as translators in transforming it as well? Because I think there is this uh, or there was this conversation in the Polish circle of translators and specialists on translation theory about the translators. Oh my God, the word escaped me, but responsibility. Yeah, that's the word.
Uh-huh.
Responsibility to the culture, to their target language, to their target culture of bringing the foreign. This was what Marta, you probably know this text by Jerzy Jarniewicz.
Hmm.
This translator as an ambassador and as someone who has this enormous responsibility to bring something and to sort of enrich the culture and the language. So do you see your role? Is it something that is important to you? I think you partly answered this question, but I just wanted you to elaborate on that a little bit, because I think it's a very fascinating take on the translator's work.
Yeah, we actually, there is a word in Polish, kulturotwórczy. So we actually I feel responsible for bringing culture and creating something. Also, it's actually interesting because here we are talking about two. um, Keith is working in English, which is this, how to say, major language, the big language, huge
Yeah.
language, and Polish is my minority one. But also, for example, diving in Spanish on one hand and Galician on the other makes you feel the difference between Galician, which is reduced, and Castellano Spanish, which is enormous and also like transoceanic thing. So of course, I think languages can communicate and can influence themselves strangely, and we also, I mean, we always adapt different words from the different languages. When you study Polish, for example, and you actually are interested by etymology, you will discover that this comes from German. Most of the scientific terms would come from first Greek, Latin, but then English, and so on. But talking about everyday language, I remember reading about Czech that they were actually creating many words in Czech. Like they would never say, I don't know, televisor. They would just create something. Computer. They would make a Czech word for everything. So Polish is more open. And talking about poetry translation, I see sometimes that I am, especially when I translate really difficult authors, like for example Olvido Garcia Valdez. She actually writes her poems in a very strange way, because you can feel that she's starting to write her poem in her head before she starts writing it. So when you translate something, you feel that there is a hidden part, which is there, and you can really sense it, but it's not a written one. So this also makes her poem explode in many ways. So when I translate her, I cannot just rationalize her and stick also to the Polish grammar. I must leave, the traces of explosion also in the Polish version. So in that sense, I would even transform or break Polish grammar just to keep this huellas, to keep traces of something that actually is not in the Spanish original. It's broken, so I must keep it broken. So then I will change my grammar.
It's a great question. It's a great question about responsibility, and I feel a dual responsibility. The first is that I'm always aware, when I read Thomas Tranströmer, I'm reading Robert Bly's version of him, or Robin Fulton's, or Jack Dean's. Like Marta said way at the beginning, and I fully buy into this. Translators are just close readers, and we're just giving our version. So, when people read Yolanda in my English, they're reading Keith Payn's Yolanda, and that's it. And they're reading Marta Eloy's Yolanda as well. So there's that responsibility, just to be aware of it, just to say, well, okay, I'm giving you my reading. I'm not taking any greater status than this. It's just my reading. It's all I've got. Here you go.
I have a question.
Yes.
I have a question. Do you remember, because actually before knowing you, like I'm starting to know you now, but before knowing you, I remember we had this confusion about English translations, and there were several Keith Payn's translations, and some of Keith Payn's translations were not even Keith Payn's translations.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, and it was Maria who brought my attention to this, and myself and Yolanda are currently trying to find out who the fantasy Keith Payn bad translator is, who's making me look pretty bad. Yeah, so there's
But
versions.
Absolutely, because this is also about translators' responsibility. You can make your translation, you can sign your translation, send your translations, and then suddenly somebody can edit your translations without you knowing it.
Yeah.
Because our job, and this is also important to say it out loud. Actually, being a translator is not seen as important as being an author. If you change something in an author's work, you can be punished. But if you actually try to edit, if you try to edit Yolanda's poem, it's
Yeah,
not
yeah,
good.
yeah.
But
Yeah,
but
yeah.
if you edit somebody's translations, people think that of course I can make it better, and don't even sign it.
Yeah, I mean that is changing the role of the translator, and this is the second responsibility I feel, especially in a place like Ireland where we read less than, it's 3% now, it's 3.5%, but essentially 3 to 4% of what we read started in another language, which is a horrendous number. In Spain, it's in the low 30s. In Poland, I think it's around the 30s as
Yeah,
well, most of Europe. And so we've I feel a huge responsibility to make that role, the role of the translator, acknowledged, not to make it important, just to acknowledge it's something we've been doing. Without translators, we wouldn't have read the Bible or Dante.
absolutely,
Shakespeare wouldn't have read Petrarch. Heaney without Milwash or Herbert would not be the same person.
absolutely.
The contemporary Irish novelists wouldn't be the same without Roberto Bolaño, who they devoured and imitated. And it's a great game to play, this kind of back and forth thing. And so it's something that exists, it's there, but it's almost as if it's the literature that dare not speak its name. It's almost, oh no, 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 don't say translation. You'll frighten people away. And it's
Yeah.
kind of, well, you've been doing it anyway, And if I was to strip my bookshelf now of books that started life in another language, it'd be very bare and very sad. Uh, so that's the kind of second responsibility, Maria, that I feel to wave the flag for poet translators in particular.
Yeah, it actually, what you said reminded me about the fragment of one of the poems in this booklet, which is called Translation. In Keith's translation, it's called Translation. In Marta's, it's called Tłumaczenie. And the fragment goes in Keith's translation into English. And at the end of the day, we write towards the margins while all the rest move to the center. And in Marta's translation, it's w każdym razie wszędzie piszemy w kierunku marginesów, a inni w kierunku środka. And I was just thinking, listening to what you said and about the responsibility, it was kind of a rhetorical question because I assumed that we all agree that it is a very important role that, like Marta said, it shapes culture. It's something that can enrich it and be this sort of counter to the mainstream of like making everything the same and going to the center and translation being something that, and poetry as well in general, but poetry translation and translation of literature, bringing the margins into the light.
Yeah, the margins always inform the center. It has always been this way in every art form, and I dance delightfully out on the margins. It's a wonderful place to be.
But also when you see, for example, Bayeux tapestry, I love the margins. Everywhere, even in art, also it's
Yes,
very interesting what's
yeah.
going on in the margins.
And in fact, the first Irish poem, and in fact, some of the earliest European poems written, were the Irish poems written by the monks on the margins of the Gospels.
Absolutely.
So the 6th, 7th, 8th century Gospels, these beautiful transcriptions from copyings of one book to another, first early translations. When the monks essentially were bored, they wrote these little poems down the margins, and they are our earliest Gaelic language, Gaelic and Latin poetry. So there is an argument, at least for Irish poetry, that our source is on the margins.
On the margins.
Yeah. So it's a nice inspiration to take as we write on.
Yeah, guys, thank you so much for this conversation. I had such a great time listening to your thoughts, and I couldn't agree more with what you said, that the role of translator should be appreciated, and the visibility should be greater. And I hope that this conversation is just a little effort to forward that. Yolanda Castaño's Versopolis booklet, which is the sort of memory of Miłosz Festival 2024, is we have it. Each of us has it in paper form, but it's also available on Versopolis website, so you can read both Yolanda's original poems and the poems in translation by Keith Payn and Marta Eloy Cichocka. Thank you so much for joining us, and keep on your great work of bringing the margins into the light. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Maria and Marta, and thank you Versopolis for hosting us today.
Thanks a lot.